All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. Is the Niner O-line an issue, or is it an underrated position group on the roster? We'll discuss that coming up next. But first, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. Pig and a Pickle. Go get the brisket. Go get the brisket chili. Go say hi to Damon and Mary. Tell them that Larry Krueger sent you. And we're also brought to you, this video is brought to you by Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles. Check them out at 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove, California. Call Anthony Catania. He's at 831-521-5264. The first Friday of every month down there at Sharp Corners, they do a little sidewalk deal where they have food and drink, and people are out there buying and selling sports collectibles. Check them out in Pacific Grove and give Anthony Catania a call. All right, let's talk about the Niners offensive line. I think if you walk up to most people and you mention the Niner O-line, they'll be like, oh, the O-line's a disaster. Oh, the 49ers O-line is so bad. I can't believe they didn't upgrade their O-line. And I think most people expected them in this draft to draft offensive linemen early and often. I think a lot of people thought the Niners would use this 2024 college draft as a way to kind of replenish the offensive line. And yet they took a receiver in round 1. They took a corner in round 2. They didn't get to an offensive lineman until the 3rd round, or I guess the 4th round, in Dominic Pooney. I guess that was the 3rd round. That was the 3rd round, and Dominic Pooney. And then they went Jarrett Kingston, another offensive lineman, in round 6. And then they also drafted Drake Nugent, or they signed Drake Nugent out of Michigan, went to Stanford and then went to Michigan, and then Bryson Mays out of Southern Miss. So they added 4 rookie offensive linemen. They also added a couple veterans. So they have added some talent to their mix along the offensive line. But I mean, let's discuss the Niner offensive line on the surface. Now, I know the interior of the offensive line was rated 28th in the NFL by Pro Football Focus, and there's only 32 teams. So, if you believe in the Pro Football Focus grading system, then you look at that interior and you say they need to upgrade. And I even think they need to upgrade. Now, I think Aaron Banks is a very good left guard. And so my issue is more Jake Brendel at center, who was a Pro Bowl alternate just 2 years ago. And, right guard, whether it's Spencer Burford or if it's the rookie Pooney or if it's John Feliciano. A lot of people have a lot of issues with Colton McKivitz. I thought McKivitz really struggled badly in week 1 against TJ Watt. I thought the rest of the year he was pretty good. He had a couple of mistakes in the playoffs. He's not an ideal right tackle. They're only paying him $7 million, so they're kind of going cheap there. But I think there's worse players. Do I think he's the best right tackle in the game? No. Do I think he's a serviceable, pedestrian right tackle? I think he is. I think he's a serviceable starting NFL right tackle. But when I say, let's talk about the Niners offensive line, it's easy to say, well, Pro Football Focus says the interior offensive line is 28th out of 32 teams. They suck. But then you look at the numbers. The Niners only allowed 34 sacks last year. That's not a big number. I mean, that number, to put that in perspective, 34 sacks allowed by the Niner offensive line last year was the 6th fewest in the entire NFL. So there's 32 teams. That means there was 26 teams that offensive lines allowed more sacks than the Niners allowed. Now, some people would say, yeah, well, the Niners run the ball a lot. And that is a factor. That's noted. The Niners were 32nd in pass attempts, so they run the ball. And maybe that is part of the reason that 34 sack total is low, because they don't pass it as much as other teams. But 6 fewest sacks allowed in the NFL. Then you go, okay, left to right. Trent Williams is the best left tackle in the game. He's an all-pro left tackle who's still going strong in his late 30s. So, I mean, Trent Williams is not the problem. Shockingly, he had some penalties in the Super Bowl that came up out of nowhere. If you had told me in the Super Bowl that Trent Williams would draw more flags than the two chief offensive tackles combined, I would have said, no way, no how, not going to happen. And that's exactly what happened on Super Bowl Sunday. So sometimes these things are hard to predict, but just left to right. Trent Williams, all pro left tackle. Aaron Banks. I think Aaron Banks, a very good left guard. 6'5", about 200 or about 330 pounds. Naturally strong, naturally athletic, doesn't miss games, has had some concussion problems. For the most part, though, he's durable as heck. He's smart. He's athletic. He's a leader on the team. I think he's really underrated. So I like the left side of the Niner offensive line. Then at center, you've got Brendel, who, as I said, was a Pro Bowl alternate just 2 years ago. But they've really deepened their pool of candidates at center. I mean, Jake Brendel can play center. They brought in Ben Barch late in the year. Barch is a great dude, and Chris Forster really talked him up late in the year. He's going to be given a chance this summer to win that center job. Drake Nugent, I think, is a really good center prospect, and I thought he looked fantastic in practice in the minicamp. He's lively, he's smart, he's strong, he's got good quickness. I like what I see from Drake Nugent. He's a Big Ten center of the year, first team All Big Ten, three-time team captain at Stanford. So you got Drake Nugent, and then you also have Bryson Mays, and all those guys. That's 4 center candidates right there. Dominic Pooney has told me that he can play center. Nick Sikel, Brock Purdy's roommate the last couple of years from Fordham, smart, tough. Supposedly he can play some center. Jarrett Kingston can play center. So they're really pretty deep at center right now. Now, I'm not a big fan of Brendel. He's a technician. He's a little underpowered. He's about 285. DJ Reader kind of owned him in the Cincinnati game last year and kind of pushed him around a little bit. Barch is a little bit bigger, a little stronger. Nugent is shorter but stout and very strong. Zakel's a big body, 6'10", 6'6", 310. Kingston is a big power lifter. You can see he's enormously strong in the upper body. So they've got options at center. So you got the best left tackle in the game. You got a very good young left guard in Aaron Banks, and Banks is 26 years old. So Banks is, literally, he was a second-round pick out of Notre Dame. He's in the prime of his career. So you got a 26-year-old guard who I really like, and then you got a bunch of options at center. At right guard, you got Feliciano. Now, Feliciano's an older player, but, man, he played well last year. He's 6'4", he's 325. He can play guard, he can play center. He's 32. He started almost his entire career, Raiders, Buffalo, New York Giants. Really good player at the University of Miami, very assignment sound, very smart, very tough. You could do worse than John Feliciano at right guard. You also have Dominic Pooney now in the mix there. You still have Spencer Burford in the mix at right guard. You have Nick Sikel, who can play a little right guard. You have Kingston, who could probably play some guard. Bryson Mays could play some guard. And then you got Colton McKivitz at right tackle, and you signed Chris Hubbard away from Tennessee. You brought in Brandon Parker away from the Raiders. So, you got a couple veteran tackles, I think, that are upgrades off of their backup tackles the last few years. So I'm just saying, you look at this 49er offensive line, and you're like, okay, they allowed the 6th fewest sacks in the league. They got the best left tackle in the game. They got a very good left guard. They got a bunch of candidates to play center, and their starter was a Pro Bowl alternate just 2 years ago. They got a bunch of candidates at right guard. And then you got McKivitz at right tackle, and he's the guy that you probably, in an ideal world, he would be your kind of jack of all trades, utility offensive lineman that can play every spot. And, that would be his ideal role on this team because they don't have a right tackle. He's got to be the starter at right tackle. But, you're talking about a player who at times has played pretty effective football. And then you look at the Niners, so they did run the ball a lot. We mentioned they gave up 34 sacks, 6 fewest. But they ranked 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards per game behind this offensive line. That's so horrible. Christian McCaffrey almost won the MVP running behind this horrible line. Brock Purdy almost won the MVP playing quarterback behind this horrible line. They were 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards per game behind this horrible line. They averaged 140 rushing yards per game behind this disastrous line. Now, you're only as good as your last start, and Purdy was hit 11 times by Kansas City's defense in Super Bowl 58. So it's not like there's not room to improve. And it's funny. I saw a scout talking about Purdy, and he's like, Purdy keeps getting better. Call him a system quarterback or whatever you want to call him, but he's more than that. He's sound in every quarter. He's a sound quarterback in every phase of the game. But yeah, Niners offensive line, I mean, is it the NFL's best offensive line? I saw the other day it was rated 10th, the 10th best line out of 32 teams in the league. I wouldn't rank them that high, but I don't think it's a disaster line. Like people talk about this line, and you would swear that the Niners can't run the ball. They can't throw the ball. They scored 30 points a game with this line. They gave up the 6th fewest sacks in the league with this line. They were 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards per game with this line. So could it be improved? Yeah. Do they have blue chip players at center, right guard, and right tackle? No, they don't. But they've got blue chip left tackle and blue chip left guard. I mean, you got pretty good left side. I would take that left side of Trent Williams and Aaron Banks. I'd put it up against most of the left side offensive linemen in the entire league. They might be able to upgrade a little bit over Brendel. Burford and Pooney are probably going to wind up sharing right guard, would be my guess. Maybe Feliciano starts at center, and those young guards start and share that right guard spot. McKivitz is a technician. They'll upgrade from him when they can get either a premier free agent or where they can get a high enough draft choice. They picked 31 this year. When it got to 31, did you want Ricky Pearsall or did you want the 9th rated offensive lineman? Because the 9th rated offensive tackle. So they went with Ricky Pearsall. I can't really fault them because I don't know. I mean, you look at that position, maybe there's of the top 10 offensive tackles, maybe you like 3 or 4 of them. They were probably all gone by the time you got to the 20th pick. You picked at 31. You said, you know what? We're not going to reach there. Then we talked to Forster after the draft. He said, you know what? You can find skill position guys that can be difference makers in the 2nd round, in the 3rd round, late in the 1st, and up into the 4th round. We can find offensive linemen that can fit our scheme on day 3, rounds 4 through 7. And, they went out and did add Pooney on day 2 and Kingston in on day 3, and then Nugent and Mays after day 3. And we'll see. But I would say, if you ask that question to me, is the 49er offensive line underrated? I'd say, yeah, it is underrated because it's rated so lowly by most people that when you look at it, you would swear that they can't win games with this offensive line. But really, their offense cooked at a pretty high level this year with this line. And that was before they added all the young depth. So they've added young depth, and including a 3rd rounder in Dominic Pooney, to what I think was an underrated offensive line. Yeah, when you've allowed the 6th fewest sacks and you're 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards, you're doing some decent things. And so this idea that the Niner offensive line is just absolutely horrible, and it was just, this was the biggest issue. I think it was among their issues. I don't know if it was the biggest issue. And when you really factor in how lowly, ranked the Niner. I mean, as I said, the Niner offensive line I saw ranked 10th overall. So if that's the consensus, then it's not an underrated offensive line. But I think that was the aberration, to be honest. I think most of the people who rank offensive lines put the Niner offensive line in the bottom 3rd of the league. And I think it's a little bit underrated compared to that level of a ranking. If you're saying they're ranked in the top 10, then they're not underrated. And maybe they're even a little overrated if they're ranked in the top 10. But I think most people would say the 49er offensive line ranks between 20 and 32. And I think it's a little bit better than that. I'd love to hear your comments below. Write them in there. Tell me what you think. Is the Niner offensive line underrated, or is it overrated? Or are they rated just as they should be? Do you look at it as the primary problem spot? Your comments below would be much appreciated. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of The Krug Show. Thanks to Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles for sponsoring this video. And thanks to all of you guys for supporting The Krug Show. on YouTube.